I think we should be good. I think we can get started.
All right, sounds good. I want to welcome everybody to this meeting of the Boston Metropolitan Planning Organization's Unified Planning Work Program Committee. I'm calling this meeting to order. I'll first read the virtual meeting guidelines. So all participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. Participants can mute and unmute themselves. If you'd like to participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function by clicking on the participants tab at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with the raise hand button, or you can use the reactions button in the toolbar, and I will then call on participants. If you're on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand, and if you have any technical difficulties, please contact Srilekha Murthy via the chat box or via email at smurthy@ctps.org or by phone at 857-702-3705. The accessibility statement for the meeting reads as follows. The meeting is being recorded and the meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions to the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, Level AA standards, and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in the meeting, please contact Srilekha Murthy via the chat box, email at smurthy@ctps.org, or by phone at 857-702-3705. So thank you. And with that, we can move on to introductions. My name is Derek Cravat from MassDOT's Office of Transportation Planning and Committee Chair. I will call the roll of other members present. So I'll start with just affiliation. So MAPC. Eric here. You don't see Eric?
I don't see Eric. I think he might be out this week.
Okay, gotcha. Sounds good. Town of Arlington, Daniel Amstutz.
Yes, Daniel Amstutz, Town of Arlington is here.
Okay. Next up is the Boston Transportation Department. Not seeing anyone. Next up is the City of Framingham. Not seeing any rep or sub. Town of Medway. City of Newton. See there. Town of Norwood.
Hi everyone, Tom O'Rourke from the town of Norwood representing Trick subregion.
And Steve Olenoff, I see you're here as well as an alternate. So
Steve Olenoff, Trick alternate.
Steve, City of Somerville. Allie.
Yeah, hi everyone, Allie Clayman. I'm sitting in for Tom Bent today, representing the Corps and the City of Somerville.
Thanks, Allie. RTAC, Lynn Diggins.
Diggins here. RTAC Advisory Council.
And then I see we have Amira from the Mbta Advisory Board.
Good afternoon, everyone. Amira Patterson from the Mbta Advisory Board.
Great. Perfect. Let's do a quick check here. I think there's a large attendees list here, so I just want to make sure. Are there any other members present that I haven't called on? I think the rest of the attendees here are staff at CTPS or other agencies that are not voting members. So I think with that, we can move to the next agenda item just in the interest of time, because I know we have a lot to discuss today. The next item is public comments. Are there any members of the public present that wish to make a comment at this time? All right. Seeing none, if you do have a comment at any point during the meeting, you can use the raise hand button or type it in the chat. If you have any written comments, you can send those to Srilekha via email, again at smurthy, smurthy@ctps.org. So the next item is vote to endorse the May 19th, 2022 meeting summary. I guess I'll ask for a motion and second to endorse the May 19th meeting minutes. Yep, Daniel.
I'll make a motion to do that with a caveat to just, my name is spelled wrong on the third page at the very top of the page, my last name. That could be corrected.
Thank you, Daniel. Tom.
I'll second Daniel's motion.
Okay. A motion now made and seconded. Is there any other discussion, questions, feedback? All right, seeing none. So I think we'll just make that change to correct the spelling of Daniel's last name. And with that, I will call the roll. So MassDOT votes yes. Town of Arlington.
Yes.
Okay. Town of Norwood.
Yes.
City of Somerville.
I think I will abstain since I wasn't actually at that meeting.
Artac.
Yes.
Okay, and Mbta Advisory Board.
I will abstain since I was not there.
Okay. Sounds good. So I believe that motion carries. I think we had 2 abstentions, but everyone else voted yes. So I believe we're good on that. So we can move to the next item, which is finalizing the federal fiscal year 2023 universe of proposed studies. So with this, I will turn it over to Srilekha.
Thank you, Derek, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for joining us for a discussion on the federal fiscal year 2023 UPWP universe of proposed studies. Before we jump into the universe and some of the additional materials that we posted, I'm going to turn it over to Take to provide some background and context for our conversation today regarding the UPWP budget.
Thank you, Srilekha. I think everybody here knows me, but just because I can't see all the participants, I'm Tegan Taika. I'm the executive director of the staff to the MPO. And I wanted to say a few things at the beginning of this agenda item, because I know one of the first pieces of information that you do need for today's conversation is the amount of money that is available for the discrete studies for this upcoming federal fiscal year. And that actually does need some context. So I'd like to step back for a moment to talk about the overall UPWP allocation of the planning funds, and then get to the amount of funding that is available for discrete studies this year, which will be about level funded compared to the last year. So let me explain why. If we could go to the next slide, please. So with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or the BIL, the planning money that is available to us to program in the federal fiscal year 2023 UPWP is increasing by about 17% relative to federal fiscal year 22. And what that increase has done is given us an opportunity to not just to revisit how we define some of our programs in the UPWP, which is something we can do every year, but it's also allowed us some more room to strategize about how we can evolve our work programs across the agency to meet both the new federal requirements, but also to sort of better accomplish some of the MPO goals that we know are very important to you all. So I'd like to talk about some of these changes in the UPWP and the allocation of funding, which is again, sort of this context setting for how much we do have left over for the discrete studies that you'll talk about today. So what this slide has is that in some cases in the upcoming UPWP budget, that we will be increasing certain line items compared to what you've seen in the prior years. And so here are 3 examples. First of all, you'd see almost a 50% increase in our line item, which is called support to the MPO, which incorporates quite a lot of work that we do. But this year will also, this coming federal fiscal year 23, will also allow us to carry out some initiatives that don't necessarily happen every year. One is we have a federal certification review process that's just launched and it's going to wrap up, towards the end of this calendar year, We also are working with the A&F committee to develop the operations plan for the board, which is a significant amount of effort for staff. And then we do need to work to keep pace with the new requirements that are in the BIL and what their implications are for our regular work. And so to do that and to better support that work, we've established an internal transportation policy task force, which is also incorporated in this line item. And if you look at the next one, the Mpo Resilience Program, you are seeing actually essentially a quadrupling of what was a previously quite a small budget. And that is because it's being expanded, because in the BIL, there is an emphasis area that's been designated, which is tackling the climate crisis, transition to a clean energy resilient future. And so we need to enhance this program to be able to work towards addressing that emphasis area that is in the BIL. And then a third sort of prior line item that you've seen before that will be increasing is the freight planning budget. And the kinds of needs that this is intended to address is to support an ongoing effort to centralize and modernize our past data collection related to freight, to build more relationships with freight stakeholders around the region, to expand our capacity to conduct studies, and particularly several that were identified in terms of stakeholder needs. So those are the kinds of things that sometimes you end up seeing in the discrete studies, but here we're looking at sort of normalizing in the freight program some of that opportunity. And then perhaps above all, still understanding and responding to the changes in freight planning that are implied by the BIL. And then if we can go to the next slide, we can also highlight that in the federal fiscal year 2023, we're developing some new programs. So the first two bullet points on the side talk about two relatively new programs. The first is a data program, which in and of itself, it does roll some of the line items that you've seen previously in the UPWP around data requests, for example, into a single program, but it also expands its scope. So the program will expand it in the sense of having four main areas of focus, and those are data planning, where we will develop data strategy, and this will also support our data strategist role, and set out a vision for our data roadmap. There'll also be a data management focus to follow industry best practices in terms of how we maintain our data and infrastructure. There will be a data research focus, which will allow us to explore cutting edge data and techniques, and will enable us to assess their usefulness and application for the MPO. And then there's a data partnership focus that will allow us to collaborate more with our data partners and other agencies and share best practices. So that's the data program, which is a very new concept that folds in some prior defined work. And then the second is what we're calling the new Multimodal Mobility Infrastructure Program, which is the successor to the recurring UPWP studies that we have had in the past in the UPWP. So it combines our funding towards addressing safety, mobility, and access on sub-regional priority roadways, addressing priority corridors from the long-range transportation plan needs assessment, the safety and operations at selected intersections work, and the low-cost improvements to express highway bottleneck locations work. And then it will also be able to accommodate some new ways in which we will look at addressing mobility topics. For example, we can start to incorporate things like curb studies based on our prior work on the future of the curb. So the new definition allows us, and combining of these programs allows us to be a bit more flexible and responsive to sort of needs as they emerge. And then lastly, there are some changes in how we account for our work in the UPWP, and that's not necessarily involving a significant increase in the funding we were allocating towards these work, but I do want to just highlight for you that there will be some changes in terms of wrapping up some work on accessible formats into a larger graphics line item, so it will look larger, but it incorporates other work. And then also separate budgets have now been broken out for our outreach and communications and our editorial work, our engagement and communications and our editorial work. And that's so that those teams themselves can better sort of prioritize, engage how to best use and apply that work across the agency and projects. So I appreciate you giving me a moment just to give you this context for the UPWP as a whole. With that, with all of those other changes, which we thought through, I think quite strategically, we are proposing level funding essentially in federal fiscal year 23 compared to federal fiscal year 22 for discrete studies. And I know that for this group, as I've known for many years, that the discrete studies are very important to you and that the budget for that is very important to you. So I wanted to make sure you understood, and hopefully we can answer any questions or concerns you might have about how we've strategically worked with the additional funding to do things, some of which we might have in the past looked to be done through discrete studies, but are now being sort of rolled up into our larger program. So with that, I can pause. We have multiple staff here who can answer any specific questions around any of these sort of programming areas before we have Srileka dive into the discrete studies themselves. So Srileka, why don't I pause there, and or Derek, I guess, as well. And if you'd like to invite any questions, I'm happy to take them or allocate them to other staff.
Sure. Thank you, Tegan. Yeah, first I'll just say that that was a great overview and good context to have to kind of frame this discussion. So thank you for that. Are there any questions? I did notice, so just to put a number on it, in the table of the universe of proposed studies for the discrete studies, the total adds up to 835,000 for each proposed study. So as we're kind of going through and looking at, I know that one of the proposals had things combined, for example, like things like that, we can, just kind of loosely keep that number in mind as kind of the amount that's the total for the level funded. So.
If I may, Derek, it looks like somebody does have a question. Also, if questions come up about these programs as you're discussing this discrete studies, we will again have staff here that can answer maybe the relationship to some of the program areas if there's questions about what overlap might be there.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. Daniel.
Thanks. I just want to say share appreciation for Tegan for coming out and talking about some of those things. I was actually thinking to myself, we haven't really talked about I guess what you call now the multimodal mobility infrastructure program, because previously we had that as sort of those recurring studies. So it's helpful that I was just wondering about, because we haven't talked about it recently, so it's helpful to bring it up here to sort of see where that's been put into a different place. And it would be interesting to learn more about how that might be different from how it's been done previously, or how it might be the same. So I appreciate you coming out and telling us more about that.
Great. Happy to do so.
Thanks, Daniel. All right. If there aren't any other questions now, oh yeah, Steve.
Did I miss it? So what's the magic number?
Is it on the next slide, Srileka? I can't recall.
Are you keeping us in suspense?
It's level funded. You have to remember what the funding was last year, Steve.
My
Right?
memory's not that good.
There it is. I'll pass it off to Srileka now, Derek, if you'd like, and then she can talk more about it. It's up to you.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. Go ahead, Srileka.
All right, so thank you so much, Tegan. That was definitely really helpful to set the context and kind of frame this conversation. So yes, bring it back to the universe itself. There is about $330,000 budgeted for discrete studies in this upcoming year's UPWP. So in the updated universe, like you pointed out, Derek, the project costs have been pulled into a separate column. And so the approximate cost, if we were to do all of those studies at the amount that they're budgeted for currently, it would be like somewhere in that 800,000 range. Of course, that is well beyond this budget. So it's important to note as well, though, that as we select projects and as we further define scopes internally, there may be room for project costs to be adjusted, but that's information that I guess at this point we wouldn't know, we wouldn't have those exact numbers if scopes were adjusted. So the goal today really is to decide on priorities for these discrete studies. Based on feedback we received from the last committee meeting, we developed 4 scenarios of potential list of studies. Logan, could you go to the next slide, please? We have the staff recommended list, the committee ranked list, a scenario without the congestion pricing study, and a scenario without the value capture study. The one caveat is that while we have estimated project costs, the estimated costs of the scenarios have not yet been completed. So if you could, please reference the scenario handout that I think was posted on the meeting calendar. We have the project IDs listed on the screen. I think that's the next slide, Logan. Yes, so we've got 1 and 2 here and 3 and 4 on the next slide. So as we open up for a discussion at this point, we'd really like for you all to consider which scenario seems to be the most closely aligned with the MPO's priorities and which studies have the potential for greatest impact in the region. So with that, I'll also note all the feedback that we have received has been documented and incorporated into project descriptions, which we are still working on finalizing. That's why they haven't been shared ahead of time, but they will go into chapter 4 of the UPWP. So with that, I guess we can open it up for discussion and sort of go from there.
Yep, that sounds good. It might be helpful to just quickly, I know that there was a handout with the scenarios. I don't know if folks all had a chance to look at it. They are posted online, but maybe if it's readily accessible, it might be helpful to have those, at least to scroll through. I'm happy to start a discussion, or if folks have initial comments, we can start with those. So does anyone have any initial questions? If you've had a chance to review the scenarios, any initial thoughts on those? Yeah, Steve.
Oh, do you have the totals for each one of the scenarios? Based upon what you have so far?
So we don't have the totals just yet. Yeah, we don't have the totals just yet, unfortunately, for each scenario.
All right, but you could just add them up according to what you have on the main sheet of the universe, correct?
Yes, well, at the very least, for all but the staff recommended list, the total is going to be that 800,000 in that 800,000 range, because each of those scenarios include all of the projects that are in this draft universe. The staff recommended list cut between 2 and 4 projects, if I'm not mistaken. So that cost would be a little lower. And I think we're just pulling up the scenarios to share the screen.
Okay.
Daniel?
Thanks. So I'm a little confused by the scenarios, to be honest. So I'll just sort of try to ask a clarifying question here. The scenarios that are like the third or the second, third, fourth, the committee ranked studies, and then the other ones sort of with or without the certain projects. Like clearly these would not be if the committee ranked ones is basically all of the projects, from sort of the top to the bottom, but that's not an actual scenario. We can't fund all of these. So would the idea be that if we liked scenario of the ranked studies, would you just fund sort of as far as you can from the top to the bottom, and then everything that's kind of at the bottom would get cut out? See, that's what got me confused. Is like, well, this isn't really a scenario. We can't fund all of these. So how do we sort of look at these scenarios that have obviously more, more studies than we can actually fund?
Right, and I guess that's where we would look to you for guidance. If the committee rank list is the scenario we want to work with, then maybe it's a question of choosing certain studies. Even if it was a lower ranked study, if that study came up as a higher priority among committee members, then that could be included versus a higher ranked study that did not have as much sort of wide-ranging support amongst the committee. And I think the same would be true for the other 2 scenarios. The expectation is not that all of these studies would be funded. It's more of a way to guide discussion on priorities and what makes the most sense, both financially and also just based on committee feedback and perspectives.
Okay, thanks.
Hallie?
Yeah, I just had a question about one of the specific studies that shows up in each of the scenarios, A1. And forgive me, since this is my first UPWP committee meeting, but I was wondering if there's been any discussion about the existing mass trails shared use path planning and design guide, and how that, or how, I guess, what's proposed in A1 might differ from that or add new resources to that.
Thanks, Hallie. Might defer to whoever is on from CTPS that might have some knowledge of that scope. Feel free to address that. Not
Yeah.
sure.
I think I could jump in here, Derek.
Sure. Yeah. Yep.
One of the things, this is one of the ones Casey put together and reviewed. This is something we talked about with MAPC, Ali, and trying to go beyond what the mass, what's there now, is trying to go back and look at what occurred with, like, take for example the Bruce Freeman Trail, what hurdles and things that they had to overcome and to be able to get their shared use path constructed and funded and constructed throughout the years. So one of the things we were proposing in this is actually trying to interview a lot of the people who worked on it, both on the city staffs or town staffs, and also on the Bruce Freeman Association. I forget their formal name, but talk to them and speak to them of what they actually had to go through to get their project completed, not just a formal guideline of if you have a rail trail, that how to turn it into a shared use path type of thing. Not so much of a design guideline, but more of a how to and what things lessons learned that in the process of developing that trail. So it might make it easier for other communities to do the same.
That's helpful. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, it sounds like sort of a lessons learned thing. Could be a good addition to the information that exists.
Thanks, Hallie. Len?
Well, I mean, I guess I'll suggest that maybe to kick us off on getting things being selected is that maybe we can decide on what we all agree should be in. And if people don't like doing it that way, then suggest something else to me. But if I were going to do that, I would say it looks like M1 is an easy yes for everybody. I think not only because it's in each of them, but it seems like in our discussions, that has pretty strong support for everyone, at least no objections from anyone.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point. I think that approach might give us some structure to talk about which ones the committee is kind of unanimously supportive of. And maybe we could, the staff recommended list has the 8 listed, but maybe for the purposes of discussion, because we might want to include things, or the committee might be interested in things that aren't on the staff recommended list, maybe we could use the committee ranked ones just to guide this discussion. And I know maybe we could start with the ones that are rated the highest from the committee and then kind of see which ones are kind of unanimously supportive, or there's kind of broad support for. So I agree, Len. I think lab and miss, that first one, there seemed to be pretty much a consensus on. So is it safe? And maybe the easiest way to do this would be to see if people have strong objections as opposed to voting to support. So if we go through one by one, if folks do have kind of opposition to anything, we could make that known, but otherwise we'll we'll assume that the committee is supportive. Is there any objection to this one at all, or any questions or clarification on this first one related to lab and municipal parking? Yeah, okay. So if we don't hear anything, let's assume that I think we're good to go on including that one as a committee recommended study. So the second one listed here was the decarbonization in the freight and logistics sector. So this was the one looking at freight, right, in Chelsea and surrounding areas, which I think there was general consensus on as well. I don't remember very strong objections to this one. Any questions on that one? Yeah, Tom.
Well, it looks like I'm the only one who didn't choose that. But given the strong support from everybody else, I would be willing to support that.
Okay. Thanks, Tom. Okay, next one is the shared use path guidebook. This one was kind of middle of the road for me, given some of the other work on this, but
Yeah, I'd like to put a hold on that one, maybe, so
yeah.
See what else, if there's stronger desire for others,
Yep.
Agreed.
Okay, so we'll kind of put that one on hold. Next one is update to the bicyclist and pedestrian count database.
Put a hold on that one too.
Hold, okay. Hold on that one. Next is transit modernization program.
Sorry, just on the
Oh, sure.
database. I guess I would actually put in a plug for that one. I don't know, it's been obviously a while since I've worked at the MPO, but my understanding is that that's one of the more important data sets that they have, and I think get up to date would be really useful, especially for cities and towns who don't have the capacity to collect that data.
Okay, then I withdraw my hold. So you convinced me, Ali. So all right. I'm really, I'm not just kidding. I withdraw my hold. So.
I was going to back up Ally on that.
Oh, well, of course it did.
Okay, and I support that as well. I know this is one that the district was very interested in, District 6 in particular. So I think, barring any opposition, if there is support for the count database, basically. Yep.
I guess, the only reason I was inclined to hold was I thought I recall from previous discussions that it seemed like someone else was capable of doing this, but I gather I was wrong about that, because from what Ali says, it seems like we're the ones to do it and people look to us. So, okay, thank you.
Right. Yeah, and I will say with any of this, we can continue some coordination. I think there was some exchange between MassDOT staff and CTPS within our secretary's office and elsewhere. So I can follow up on that as well. And I think that may have gotten a little lost, but in general, I think there's support. Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, we're talking about T2 right here.
Right now, we're talking about the A3, the updated bicyclist and pedestrian count database. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm in A3.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, did we discuss T2 yet?
Not yet. That one's next.
Oh,
Yeah. I think we were pretty much done with.
I'll get back.
Okay. I think we were, unless there's any other comments on A3, I think that one was. I think there's support for the idea. It's just a matter of what the source is. If it does turn out that support from CTPS is needed, then it sounds like there's support for this work being done. So we can note that. The next one, is T2. So Steve, kick off that one. I think you're on mute. Steve. Oops. Steve, you're on mute. Sorry.
So, yeah, could you explain that one a little more? Not clear to me exactly what that is. What's the transit modernization program and what exactly will be done on this?
Yeah, so I know that there is a line in the tip for transit modernization. It was something, right, that came out of the long range transportation plan. And this would provide, it would be similar, if my understanding is right, to something like a discretionary program that funds transit projects and looks at opportunities to use MPO target funding on transit related projects. And this would just fund the staff support for that program. So I don't know if Sandy or anyone else wants to.
And who decides exactly what that's going to be, though?
Yep, Sandy, go ahead.
Yeah, happy to pitch in here. So this is very equivalent to what we did for the Community Connections program a number of years ago, where it would just be putting aside a little bit of money to develop that program in advance of its implementation in the tip. If you remember a couple of years ago, maybe 3-4 years ago, we put aside about $20,000 in one year and $25,000 in a second year to develop the Community Connections program before it started providing funding through the tip. So this would be doing the same thing for the upcoming transit modernization program, which the MPO has said in the LRTP is going to be a funding program within the TIP. And yeah, so just be putting a little bit of money aside to do that development thing, making sure it's got a profile in that way.
Okay, and that's $75,000. That seems like it might be a lot for that.
I mean, I would say it is more than we put aside for community connections, but the amount that we put aside for community connections was not sufficient. So I don't know who designated the budget for that one. I do think that we would probably, to do it well, it would need to be higher than that budget was a few years ago.
Okay.
David?
I'm sorry to have come in late. I'm just trying to remember what I did. Can you just remind us the numbers 1 to 8 were our priorities, with 8 being our highest priority, right? And 1 being the lowest priority of what we recommended. Isn't that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Len?
So this is a question to Sandy. So you're saying that for the community connections, those preliminary years, that was funded out of the UPWP discretionary study funds.
Yeah, that is correct.
Oh, okay. So there's a precedence. I was going to say, I kind of like for these to be more studies, as opposed to support. Although I advocate for support a lot, and so it's like, and I guess I would just. So why is it that I'm sorry, I'm getting hamstrung here. Why is it that this money couldn't come out of the MPO from elsewhere?
So it can, right? I think one of the things that we've done in the past years is that ideas go into the universe, and then sometimes they get sorted into discrete studies, and sometimes they, you direct us to put it somewhere else. And maybe somebody from CTPS management can speak a little bit to why we're proposing this as a discrete study this year. But in the past, some ideas end up living elsewhere. Not everything that's in the universe needs to become either a discrete study or it's out entirely.
Yeah. And I understand what you said. That previously, like community connections, they weren't funded enough, so you really want to get enough funding. It's just that it's like a quarter of the budget, and it's not even research. But as I said, I often say we need to support folks in order to help them develop things in order to then make the proper requests. I mean, so I'm a little conflicted here. Okay, thanks.
Excellent. Yeah, we can yeah, keep that in mind. It's this one. Okay, so this one was also on the staff recommended list. Yep, go ahead, Ally.
Yeah, I guess before we move on from that one, I'll put in a plug to fund this from somewhere. I guess Somerville applied for and received a community connections grant. And the work that MPO staff did to develop that program, was very helpful. And I think I agree with Sandy that I think even more could be done that could help potentially the transit modernization program run even smoother, or set it up so that it can run smoother. I know that at least from Somerville's experience, there were just sort of questions being the first year of the grant program on what was our responsibility versus the MBTA's, how to transfer the funds, what was the cost sharing structure, what needs to be done to access the funds, what are the contracting mechanisms. So things like that caused a lot of delays for our project. And so I see a lot of value in this type of thing to help set up the transit modernization program.
Sally. Yeah, Len, did you want to?
No, I want to go after the net, please. So
Okay.
please, thanks. No problem. Thanks.
Okay, go ahead, Annette.
Thanks, Derek. One of the main advantages of keeping it as a discrete study is giving it its own distinct budget so that it doesn't get subsumed by other tasks under a program. This is a very specific goal-oriented project, I believe, to come up with something that works for municipalities, that makes sure that the program meets what the board desires it to do. And so that we have a well-structured program and we can do the outreach that's required to engage the communities in applying for grants under this program. If we were to keep it within one of the existing programs, it then becomes, as just a task, and it doesn't get the same level, not necessarily the same level of attention. This would give it a separate project manager and someone who would be held accountable to making sure that the work gets done during the year. So I think there is an advantage to making a discrete study. In terms of the funding, it doesn't really make a difference, because if we did put it under a program, that would take away from the amount of money that we had for discrete funding studies anyway. So it doesn't really change the balance in terms of funding.
Okay, I'm glad I waited for you to speak, because you just dealt with everything I was going to ask or advocate. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Annette and Len. So with that, it sounds like there's general support for this task, and I agree. I think this is an important program and something that's in the long range plan and something that the MPO supports, and the more staff time that can be dedicated to it, the better as far as the program implementation goes. So it's a clear connection between having this funding being put towards something and having an outcome that's associated with it. So I definitely support that, and sounds like others do too. But if folks have any objections, now's the time to say it. Otherwise, I think we can consider this one a general support from the committee. Tom?
Yeah, not an objection necessarily, but if I'm reading it right, was the budget 330,000?
Yeah, the overall budget for discrete. Yes.
Okay, thank you. So far we've looked at 4 that we seem to be all in agreement on, which adds up to 380,000. So we're already over budget.
Right. Yeah, I'm trying to keep track too. So the lab municipal parking is 125. account database is 80. This one is 75. And then the freight study as well. So yeah, I think
So
what we'll do is see what there's general support for, and then maybe we could whittle it down to the
And
ones
come
that we
back.
support. And
Yeah,
within that, yeah, come back and then,
okay.
yep. Len?
Okay. I agree with everything I've heard for supporting this. I'm just trying desperately to get this money from someplace else. So it's like people come to us, and say, we want you to do this for us. And so they essentially pay, the staff to do the study. And given that this is going to benefit other entities, would it be possible for them, to pull together money and then say, okay, we want CTPS to do this, for us? And then now, because they are essentially a client, we're working for them. We do have to then prioritize it, give the resources that it needs. And so that's one question. I guess the other question that fits into this is, like, let's say we do it this year. We go ahead and fund it this year. Could we maybe put something like that in place for next year? Because it seems like this would be something we need to be doing for more than 1 year, as if we treat it like we did Community Connections. And that'll be the last I'll say on or ask on this topic. Thank you.
Yep, that's a good question. And yeah, I guess just maybe Sandy or someone on staff could speak to the timing of Community Connections, because this transit modernization line and the tip is in 2025, right? That's the earliest year for it. And I know we're, next year will be 23, and then, we're still a couple of years away. So I'm curious, what was the timing on the Community Connections and the Discrete studies? Was that kind of 2 years before the program was implemented, or was it?
Yeah, it would be the same. We had 2 years of dedicated funding for Community Connections development in the UPWP before it was in the TEP.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. Sounds good. Did that answer your question, Len? Was there another question?
Well, it was me, but no one's raising their hand to it. So it probably means that it's not a reasonable thing to try to do. That's fine.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe things go. Yeah, we maybe as part of the kind of follow-up work on this, it's possible we could reach out to other agencies and see what the potential is. I know there's some, there's other funding sources, so we could look at that. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Daniel.
Thanks. Just another suggestion is like, I don't know if this if there would be enough funding, but I don't know how much we ended up spending on development of the Community Connections program, but I was just suggesting that if we have a couple of years before the actual rollout of the program, if this maybe T2 would be funded at a lower level and be sort of a phase 1, and then maybe next year would be a phase 2 to sort of follow up and continue that work. But again, I'm not really sure what the money, how much we ended up spending on Community Connections, like if 75 is enough or not enough for total for developing the program.
Yeah, so the total for Community Connections was, I think, $45,000 over 2 years. I believe it was 20,000 1 year and 25,000 in the next. And again, my opinion as the person who did a lot of that work is that was not a sufficient amount of funding. So I think we would like it to come in higher, whether it needs to be 75. I was not involved in estimating that budget. I'm not sure who developed it. So I would think that there would be funding for it in both 2023 and 2024. We're not going to do all of the work in 2023, but I don't know whether the intent is to split the 75, is to do 75 in 23 and something in 24, or whether the intent of the 75,000 was thinking that all of the work would get done in 2023. So maybe somebody else can speak to that.
Yeah, I'll speak to that. I think the intent was to do the 75 as the total, but again, we can work with that. But I think if we did split it into a phase 1 and phase 2, that we wouldn't need to go any higher than the 75. I think that would be the absolute. That would be the absolute ceiling for that.
Okay, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think that especially if we start getting into a funding crunch, that perhaps looking at funding it at a lower level this year and then funding it at a maybe equal level the next year, like 30 and 45 or 40 and 40 or something. Thanks.
Right. Yep.
All right. That's helpful. Thank you. So just in the interest of time here, want to move us along to make sure we can get a sense of these priorities and then have time to still revisit the ones that we're supporting. So the next one is analyzing environmental justice impacts of congestion pricing, TE1. So, I know this isn't a staff recommended list. Just looking back at this and looking at the rankings, it looks like 4 staff members maybe didn't vote on this one, 3 rated it highly, 1 rated it a 1. And looking at, committee support, I know that, as far as the MassDOT position goes and statewide, this is very much a statewide issue and something that, MassDOT in general has been, following the administration's lead on, just because this is something, I think that if it were to happen, it would be a statewide kind of directive and we might restudy the issue anyways. So the actual effectiveness of the study coming right now, is a little questionable, but I especially when we're talking with limited funding and we know that some studies could go to have, more of an impact as opposed to something that we're not sure if something like this will be happening, because it's the implementation of congestion pricing isn't at the discretion of the MPO. I'm not sure. That's the rationale, I think, for sometimes MassDOT not voting in favor of this. And I think we all know that this is effective in other places and other cities. It's just a matter of, for the purposes of this committee and thinking about the MPO, what MassDOT's kind of leadership would vote on. And, so that's kind of some word vomit, not the most articulate way to say it, but I've just, just some initial thoughts on this one, but curious what folks have to say, on this. Yeah, go ahead, Len.
I hear you, Derek. I hear you. I was perhaps one of the people giving MassDOT a hard time about this, last year, and saying if we're gonna say we're gonna do it, this year, then we really need to do it this year. And I think I said as much earlier. I guess what I find compelling about what you're saying now is that we are going to have a new administration this time next year. And I hear myself saying to the public, trust us, we don't do it this year and we don't get any indication from the administration they're going to do it next year. We'll really do it next year. But that's where I see myself heading, especially since we're already over budget, so there we go. That's support with another word cloud. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Len. Go ahead, David.
So I don't remember exactly, but I feel I couldn't wrap my head around this one. I think that's why I didn't vote for it at all. I think that we're talking about roadway congestion pricing, and I don't know, it just feels to me like even when it's not congestion pricing, it's just so unfair as it is now with the charging for east-west and no charge for north-south, and then we charge a fee to get to Chelsea and we charge a fee to get to East Boston, and I don't know, and we don't charge a fee to get to certain suburbs. It feels like that's a bigger issue in terms of fairness and equity. So I think that's what I was thinking, which is why I didn't vote for it at all.
Thanks, David. Tegan?
Sorry for being off camera. I have spotty internet. I'm happy to let any other board members go in terms of this conversation if there are others who are wanting to say something and then follow up after that. Derek, is anybody else looking to talk?
Looks like Daniel has the raised hand, so go ahead, Daniel.
When I pause, yeah.
Well, okay. I was gonna wait for you, Tegan, but I
I can go if you want me to, if you think it'll help
Maybe, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
What I will just say is that the study as defined in the universe, the congestion pricing study that was really developed in the context that we were being asked by the board to ensure that we brought something to the table this year because we wanted to do something related to congestion pricing, to Len's point, you know, kind of putting it off a year, but wanting to come to the table with something we could do. I don't think that we have the universe idea refined yet to a point where this would be exactly the study we would move forward with. And if we do want to keep some kind of placeholder for a congestion pricing related effort, we would need to dig more into how we would carry out this study or revise it a bit to be meaningful. So I apologize that, you know, these are always only developed so far when we get to the, you know, these discussions. And I think this one more than most, because it is a very complicated topic politically and, you know, technically and logistically. This is one that it might have, you know, made sense to invest more staff time really early on in developing an idea. But if the board still wants to keep something like this on the table, we would need to really dig in and invest some time on refining the intent and the outcomes of something related to either looking at the impacts in the Boston region or how it might be something that we can start to think about the application in the Boston region. But again, lots of work there to do to sort of refine that idea.
Thanks, Tegan. That's helpful. Daniel?
Thanks. I guess so, you know, put in a plug for looking at this again or keeping it, I guess, on the list of possible ones. There are some other ones we haven't talked about yet that I think are likely to fall away as well as we go further down the list. But just, you know, my experience over the last few years of being on the board and on the committee is either this issue, either we don't have enough information to study it or it's not the right time to study it. So it seems like, you know, we're always pushing it back another year because, well, it's just not the right time, or, you know, so, you know, to me, it's kind of like, if we're actually going to seriously think about this, that there needs to be some preliminary work that is done towards it. And so I'm disappointed that it's like we've continued to talk about it, but every time we talk about it, it's like not now, and it'll never be the right time. So I just want to bring that out, as that's a very frustrating kind of position that we seem to find ourselves in.
Thanks, Daniel. Definitely understood it. It's kind of a complicated question, and especially when we have limited funds, like it's tough to decide. So I think all good points. So something maybe not to remove completely, but just to kind of put aside perhaps for now. But so then, any other comments on that one? So it sounds like a mixed. Yep, go ahead, Tegan.
I think what we should commit to as staff is, if the board does want to keep this in the universe, I mean, what we would need is kind of a solid thumbs up to go through what would be actually a pretty significant level of effort just to really refine what that study would look like. And so again, I think, you know, if the board does decide to keep it or at some limited amount, we would need to go back, you know, internally ourselves and discuss what we think would fit that spot and or the budget that you'd be willing to allocate. So I just want to throw that out there. Or if the board removes it or decides to delay another year, that's fine. I think that's really up to you and the commitment that you all are making and made last year. So we will happily try to work with you on the direction you want to move forward with.
It's taken. Yeah, Len.
It's a bit of a question. So last year, I remember Eric from MPC kind of showed us what MPC is planning on doing with their essentially research monies. I would like to see us keep this in the universe as something that we really want to do, and try to do something with MAPC, combining forces with MassDOT, and maybe forces in the legislature, especially once we get a new governor, and just really try to move this forward with a bigger effort and one that is more coherent, I mean, so that we're all at least on the same page with wanting to do this research. So that's where I am, Dan. I hear you, but if we had the money to do it, I'd say yes for sure. But we're going to be taking that money and not doing something else. That's it. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, Allie?
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to say that I agree with, I think what I've heard from Daniel and Len, although I'm not sure I heard Len correctly, but just in terms of, I always started feeling like we're pushing this topic off and it being a very important topic. And I really liked the idea that Tegan just brought up. And if that's something that, MPO staff think that they could actually dedicate resources to really scope this and come up with a clear idea of what this would be and how it could, move this issue forward, I would be in support of that.
Thanks, Allie. Appreciate it. Okay. So just moving along. So again, I want to kind of be mindful of time here, and if I may propose just throwing something out there for the group at this stage. So we have congestion pricing. We're kind of down, like halfway down this list now. Before we talk about anything else more substantively, I was going to, I proposed in my list of things to the MPO, and this is based on some, input from OTP staff, these tasks on impact, A2, impact of new transportation facilities in the Boston region, as well as TE3, assessing mobility options at affordable housing developments. I believe the other one was T2, but I know there was interest in that one. So in the kind of, intervening time, I had conversations with some folks at MassDOT, and, based on the committee feedback, it didn't sound like there was a whole ton of interest in A2 or TE3. This is impact of new transportation facilities and assessing mobility at affordable housing. So I just wanted to kind of get a check on those two. Kind of, I know we were talking in order of priority, but now I just want to kind of switch gears and start with these, because it seemed like, these might not, if there is anything we can rule out, I just wanted to kind of get a sense of that. Go ahead, Daniel.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I can certainly see that on the ranking list. I was actually gonna say also, I mean, I felt like there are some questions about T3, the BRT, as it related to the rest of the bus network redesign, and whether those things are kind of working at different purposes. Well, there's a question about, like, is that the right time to do that now if there's a whole network redesign process going on? And then secondly, I know Eric and maybe others had a question about T4, about the value capture one, and about exactly how that would work, or whether that would be yeah, I don't know if there's as much interest as that one either. So I would just throw out there as that those might be other two that might also fall away here based on some uncertainty about whether they are high priorities.
Yeah. Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, Len.
And for TE2, I mean, $20,000. I mean, I really think that one, will be well worth the investment, and I just strongly feel that a lot of the RTAs will benefit from this, and we could learn something that helps everyone with respect to increasing the usage of buses. And so if it really is around 20K, I hope we can find money to do it.
Right, and I know in the staff recommended list there's a combined task for TE. It looks like it would be a combination, right, of TE2 to the one on flexibly equity analysis of demand response transit, and then the flexibly routed transit, right? So I'm curious.
Yeah, it's in the third and fourth scenarios. It wasn't in the staff recommended list just
Okay.
because we hadn't developed the combined sort of description for those two projects when we had done the staff recommended list. But the goal is to combine the two of them.
Okay. So I know that there was, that one was generally viewed favorably, and I think Len is right. I think combining them seems like it would accomplish a lot of what we had discussed. So, as far as this list goes, that would combine TE2 and and T1, right? So combine those and then propose, I think Len is right, and Daniel too, that there was some discussion on the value capture task potentially not. That one was a little unclear, along with the two I had mentioned, mobility options at affordable housing developments and impacts of new transportation facilities. Like, just these are kind of nebulous and like, they're interesting ideas, but the direct impact, especially when we're thinking about limited funding, is, they're kind of interesting study ideas, but they're more for kind of curiosity as opposed to having a direct impact on some programming and actual project development and thinking about what's going to kind of be most impactful. So if there's no significant objection, I guess I would propose maybe, seeing if there's support for removing, at least for right now, and I'm just going to propose these three, A2, T4, and TE3. And that's impact of new transportation facilities in the region, funding free fares, value capture, and assessing mobility options at affordable housing development.
So I will say, regarding the value capture study, we've been in conversation internally as well as with the MPTA regarding a potential expansion of the scope to look beyond just value capture as a method of eliminating fares and look at sort of transit financing in general. That was feedback that we received from the last meeting, the last time we discussed the study, and it's something that we had discussed internally as well when we were developing the staff recommended list as a possibility. So if there is support for thinking a bit more broadly about this subject, I think we can sort of rework a study description for T4.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. So maybe not moving it off the table completely. And maybe what would be helpful as an exercise after this is the ones that we haven't decided to just kind of remove, if we could see what the dollar amounts are and get a sense of, within that, if we keep it on the table, maybe factoring that into the large, come up with a list that adds up the ones that we decided not to remove, and then that might make it easier for committee members to decide which ones they might want to vote to keep, or which one is kind of not kind of within that list based on that amount. So okay, so that's for that one, and we can certainly have more discussion. But is there any objection to removing the other two I mentioned, the A2 or TE3?
No objection.
Okay. All right. So hearing none, I think it's safe to assume to staff and Shrelke that those ones can, like, when building the final list, I think we can probably remove those from kind of consideration. And as the one that kind of proposed those, I personally am fine with that. I think these other ones are more impactful and in line with the MPO's goals. Yep, go ahead, David.
So are we saying, which I'm glad, that we're saying right now that we would be keeping T4 on the table for this cycle, but think about it more broadly and come back to it I think that that would be great, but are we talking about this cycle or just for the future?
I think the goal is for this cycle, like for this upcoming fiscal year.
Okay, that sounds great to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit of clarification there on T4. You know, I think in the conversations we've had in previous meetings and offline, you know, I think from our perspective that I know there's a lot of complexity to this one, and there were a number of facets of this proposal that different people were reacting to. But I think if this does stay on the table, I think I would be interested in broadening it to be more related to, you know, different methods or ways to fund transit and leave the scope a little bit more open. I mean, we can certainly have further conversations about that. I know this is still fairly far down on the list, but you know, I just wanted to, you know, I think, you know, the specific, it's trying to do a lot of work right now as written, and I think if we broaden that to, you know, what are the various different ways that can be used to fund transit service and transit policy priorities as they're developed, that might be a helpful way to look at it.
Thanks, Laura. Len?
As much as I'm in favor of this, I mean, I think one argument for maybe waiting, you know, for the next cycle is that we could see how the
You want to unmute?
yeah, I'm sorry, I muted myself.
Okay.
We could see how the fair share, the constitutional amendment goes. I mean, that's up in November, and so that's all. But I'm in favor of it. However the group decides to go, I will support.
Excellent. That's a good point. Okay, so that's some helpful notes on kind of revamping that one. And then I think the only other one that we haven't touched, I know Len mentioned it, it's been mentioned briefly, is this opportunities for bus rapid transit in the Boston region. I know there's been discussion on maybe waiting to see how, you know, the bus network redesign goes and whether this would kind of get in the way of that. But by the time the UPWP is in place, the routes for that will likely be, you know, kind of at the final stages. And so then it would be a matter of, among those that are kind of, you know, going to be in the redesigned network, which ones are good candidates for bus rapid transit. And so I could see this one still being of value. And I'm just curious if, you know, maybe this is one that's better for next year, so we can actually see a final list of the sort of network. But I'm just curious if folks had strong feelings, or if this one would be a good candidate to maybe put off in the interest of funding these other studies. But you know, I'm could go either way, but I could see.
Yeah, let's put it off. It's far down. We're way out of money. So yeah, next year, maybe.
Okay. So yeah, this does seem like it might be a better candidate for next year. So unless there's significant opposition, I think, you know, staff can assume maybe that one is out as well. So okay, so the ones that that I had highlighted as ones that are of interest to the committee to move forward are the lab and municipal parking, sustainability and decarbonization, updated bicyclist and pedestrian count database, transit modernization program, environmental justice impacts of congestion pricing, and a kind of transit financing scope broadly, right? So that's, looks like 6 studies, right? So we kind of whittled this down to those 6. So, and I haven't been doing the math. I'm not sure where we are with with how much that adds to.
Could you give us the numbers on those as well as the description?
Yeah, if anyone's keeping track, that's like 225 plus 80.
Just to clarify, when you say numbers, do you mean the like M-1 or the cost number?
He meant the M-1.
M dash,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, those numbers.
Oh, I see.
Those them, okay.
Yeah.
Right, so the ones I had flagged were M1, TE4, A3, T2. Hold on, my comment note is getting in the way here. TE1, T4, and then I forgot to mention this, that a combined TE2 and T1. So the equity analysis of demand response, as well as one looking at flexibly fixed route bus service. So
I-
those I think are of interest as well.
I'll happily take T3 by itself.
T3.
I mean, I'm sorry, T2 by itself. I'm sorry, T2. You know, if combining it with something
Yeah.
causes it to not get there, I mean, I take T2 by itself. For 20K.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So that's like between 7 and 8 studies, depending on what we combine.
Without the combination of T2 and TE1, we're at 300,000.
For those 7.
Just trying to figure out how we're going to combine T2, TE1.
Oh, I see. Okay. Sounds good. Okay. So, I mean, okay, so we've essentially eliminated two, kind of, I guess, four of the 11, right? So if staff is able to go back and look at what could reasonably be budgeted, maybe if the budget could be distributed among those 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the 7 to 8 that we've discussed as being of interest. Okay, thank you, Amira. That's helpful. So we're at kind of 445. So then it's a matter of eliminating, 115,000. So that's maybe between 1 and 2 studies, depending on the math. But it's also possible, right, that we could cut transit modernization or look at maybe lowering the amounts for some and trimming back the scope. So, but does this give you some, Srileka and other staff, does this help kind of narrow down what to kind of look for as far as feedback on these scenarios?
To some extent, yes. We've got these 7 studies that we can move forward with. I will say, since we're aiming to present no longer, of course, next week at the MPO, we're aiming to present this draft UPWP on the 21st, and thus get a draft published for July 14th. I guess at this point, we're looking to really finalize this list today. If it's a question of these are the 7 studies that we want, let's make the budget work, I think that's something we could do. The question is then if we have time for another meeting before we publish this draft.
Okay. Would it also, I mean, is it helpful to identify 2 that the committee, if you're putting it together and it's over budget, would it be helpful to maybe among the ones we've kind of flagged, 2 studies that if the budget does not allow for, that maybe would then fall off?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
Okay. So I guess just right now, are there any immediately that come to mind for folks? I mean, to me, it sounds like, congestion pricing and the fares question, the value capture task, or kind of, I guess, transit funding, like those were two that there's sort of split opinions on. I'm just curious if.
Yeah, I would support that, Derek. And
Okay.
Support.
Dropping them. Because right now, this discussion now is about what to drop, so.
The other thing I will say is just going back to the conversation on the transit modernization program. If we do want to split this work up into 2 years, we can say we budget for 30,000 this year or 35,000, and then the difference for next fiscal year. If we can agree on doing that here, then we can assume that the budget for T2 would be lower,
Right.
given that we're splitting the work up over 2 years.
Right. Yeah, that is helpful. Okay. So maybe with that change, if we were, maybe the follow-up is just to add up the totals for the 5 that we have agreed on, and then seeing what can fit after that. Laura.
Sorry, I feel like I'm just losing track a little bit of what's in and what's out. So can you just repeat where we are right now, or asking for feedback on that? Thank you.
How much?
Yes, no, it's good. I also trying to keep track. So, okay, so what I have is us kind of definitely keeping our M1 lab and municipal parking, TE4 sustainability and decarbonization, A3 updated bicyclist pedestrian count database, T2 transit modernization program, which may be a lower amount depending on whether it's split over 2 years, and then TE2 equity analysis of demand response transit, and that may be combined with T1 flexible fixed route bus service. And then the 2 that are kind of on the fence are TE1 environmental justice impacts of congestion pricing, and is it T4 right now called funding free fares, but which could be looking more broadly at transit funding. So the kind of first, I guess, 6 or so studies would be kind of in the recommended list. It seems like there's budget for those, and then after kind of maybe subtracting out some amounts for transit modernization, or seeing what options might be there, we might end up removing those last 2 on transit funding and the congestion pricing. Go ahead, Tegan.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer, I'm just sensitive to the points that folks have brought up about the commitment that the committee made last year related to congestion pricing. And so that's another one that we could look at, that if there's not enough money to fund everything, and there is some question around, the value of doing it this year, we could try to approach it with a reduced amount, or come up with a reduced, way to propose that we continue to think about this without simply fully delaying it. And it would be helpful to know from the board if there's an interest in that, or if it really is sort of a cut it completely and say that we had that commitment, but things have changed, or otherwise. I just don't want you or us to be questioned on kind of those commitments that were made without having a good explanation as to what we decided to do.
That'd be kind of more funding under staff time generally, maybe not being a discrete project, but having some intentional funding dedicated to it on the operations side for the MPO work.
Or a much smaller amount on the discrete studies list, that as well.
I see. Gotcha. Len, did you have a comment on that?
Well, yeah, I was gonna say I'm in favor of that. mean, it'll be, I'm sure we'll make it legit, you know, I mean, and that's necessarily part of it is let's see what we can do next year. I mean, let's really work, I mean, because like I said, we'll have new leadership, you know, and so yeah, that's why I'm fine with waiting, but if yes, we can do something in the meantime, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a fair kind of compromise. And at least having some degree of work done on it, maybe not a full-blown study, but have some, maybe some just like background research for, policy ideas or looking at what a Massachusetts specific version might look like. Might be a good middle ground there. So, okay. So, yeah, I think between that and maybe reducing T2 and reducing the task there on congestion pricing, hopefully we can get that within the budgeted amount, and maybe the next step is taking this feedback, doing the math on that, sending a list around, right, and just kind of confirming that list kind of matches what we've discussed. And maybe it would be helpful just, I know this is all kind of being done verbally, and I don't want to not have a mechanism for folks to continue to comment, but would it give enough time, maybe by the end of I don't know, next week, if you could just kind of finish out the math on this, Srilekha, maybe just put together a quick 1-page summary of what we discussed, send it around, and have folks kind of send comments kind of sooner rather than later, so we have time to get the document together. But does that sound like a reasonable next step?
It does. I think I would still ask though today if we can make a bit of a determination on, by how much we should reduce the funding for T2, and if we need to reduce the funding for TE1, then again, sort of by how much, because I can make those estimations, but they're not necessarily going to be, they're going to be estimations. And if they're wrong, I don't want to get it wrong and then have to continue to go back and forth, especially if we're looking to publish the document on the 14th.
So how much are we over by at this point?
240.
We're over by 240.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you take out the last two studies, we're over by, or are these two the last two studies?
So the last two studies, let me pull that up. So last two was assessing mobility options and impact of new active transportation. So taking those out, this is just the 7 that we had agreed upon. Now, if we take out if we take out at least the value capture study, and then depending on how much we want to reduce this one, the congestion pricing study by, this will reduce the total amount.
How much are we over by?
270.
What happens when you make T2?
180.
If you make T2 37,500, just out of curiosity, if you cut it in half there, then it's.
Srilekha, TE1 is 70,000, so that might help too.
Okay.
Can you maybe write down on line 10, on row 10, the budget that we're aiming for?
And then if you subtract, right, B10 from B9, we'd get the difference in what we need to still cut, right?
32,500. That's not right. 132,500.
Yeah,
Sorry,
Okay.
math was never my strong suit.
that's okay. That's what spreadsheets are for, you know? So, well, I mean, I guess, yeah, I guess I would, if 50,000 is for a combination of TE2 and T1, and then we just do TE2, which is 2,000, 20,000. That gets us 30. And TE1.
Yeah, a few hands raised, so I'll start with Daniel.
Yeah, thanks. So I apologize, a bit distracted a few minutes ago, but I'm wondering, I feel like in the last couple of years, we've been able to fund, this number of studies, or even one or two more, unless those also included the like the sub-regional priority stuff that was sort of the ongoing or the continuous ones. I'm just wondering about like the M1 and TE4, like do those, especially like M1, are they, is that something proposed to be in a single year? I'm thinking again about phasing. Like we phased like the future of the curb studies and the one about trip generation, is that something that could similarly be phased here? Like, does it have to be under $25,000 next year? And I guess similar to the one about the freight study, also considering if there's going to be a little bit of more money put into the freight program, like is there some additional things that could go into there that would lower the cost, since those are two of the highest ones right now?
Yes, I think those are really good points. And I'll ask Sandy to step in because M1 was one suggested in collaboration with MAPC for sure. And TE4 would also be under the freight program. So
Yeah, I would say they're both amenable to phasing in one way or another. I don't think the folks from MPC who I've been working with on M1 are here today, but I do think that budget could come down a little bit, is a little bit amenable to coming down. I'd have to talk to them exactly about what we could accomplish with a somewhat lower budget. I will say that parking data collection is very expensive and kind of person power intensive, because you do have to send people out there to do the work. But again, this could be a multi-year. I think this would be one that would be more of a phasing rather than reducing the budget to bring the absolute number down. As for the freight study, so I think I've mentioned before that this is something that we're breaking into modules, and we could bring the number down for fiscal year 23 a little bit. As MAPC will be putting some money into the study as well, and I'm happy to talk about that in more detail if folks are interested. We wouldn't want to bring it down too much, because then we really wouldn't be able to accomplish much, but we could definitely knock something off of it and bring that into a future year.
Yeah, I'll just follow up to say, so thank you. And I guess follow up to say, like, yeah, I'm just trying to understand also, like, when you mention MAPC, that's great that they're involved, but what are they bringing their own technical assistance to the table, funding? Like, is this funding just for, this funding as it is just the MPO CTPS, but is, if you add in like the MAPC piece, like what does that make a total project? What does that total project look like? So that's another, I'm trying to understand that as well.
Yeah,
so
we haven't spoken at that level of detail about M1. I will say for the decarbonization study, for TE4, that yes, they are bringing some of their own. MAPC is bringing some of their own technical assistance money to the table. I don't have a number on that yet, but that's another thing that would help us bring that number down, I think, in the first year of the study. It's also because it's such a large scale study and something that we're committed to for these several municipalities that have asked. We're also looking at external funding sources for the future years.
Thanks, Daniel and Sandy. Allie?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I had very similar questions, so thank you. There's a full discussion. I guess one question I have is just about TE2, and I don't know if anyone on the staff can speak to the budget for that. I guess I'm sort of wondering if that's enough budget to produce what's being proposed.
So the way we have the scope written right now is we've combined TE2 and T1. And I will ask Rose McCarron to speak on, I guess, on that combined scope, just because that's kind of what we are working with right now. Rose?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So I think there's levels of what we could do for this study as well. I think if you want to fund it, we can assess what options there are given the budget. There has been a lot of work that's already been done in this realm in terms of the public transit human services transportation plan. And so we can build off that and essentially just try to map areas where there are low people who have low access to resources or high concentration of older adults. So we could limit it to something like that, or we could expand it to look at how providing flexible transit service could help fill some of those service gaps. So I think there's, there's a level of just doing an overlap of where there's populations in need. There's sort of a more advanced sort of level of service analysis of what's available to vulnerable populations. And then there's offering recommendations. And so I think we could tier the study based on the level of funding that we have available to go through those three options.
Thanks.
Thanks, Rose. David?
I don't know. I think in general, dragging something out for 2 years when it could otherwise be done in 1 year is usually not the most efficient way of doing things. I think if the only reason we're doing it is to squeeze something else on here, I just think it's better to pick the projects that we want and do them efficiently and keep people focused on them and not drag them out. And then next year, pick other projects.
Makes sense. Len?
So a quick comment and question. So the comment on the T2 and what Rose was saying, also factor in when looking into that, maybe places that aren't pedestrian friendly, because there, as I think we get to less dense environment, we lose sidewalk infrastructure. And so these flexible stops can really help with demand in those kind of places. And the question is on T4, you have it as at 100K. Has that gone up since the initial universe sheet, which had it at I think it was 60 to 80K? I'm sorry, maybe I'm looking at the wrong one.
No, that was my mistake.
T4. Okay, all right. I get us some money, free money.
So do you want me to put it at 60 or 80 or somewhere in between?
In the middle, of course, right? Yeah. So that's 70. Maybe I'll make it low. Yeah, 70.
TE4. This is the free one, right? Because T4.
Yeah, I think what had happened there is that we had an initial estimate when we first did the universe, and then we had recalibrated a little bit higher based on some internal conversations.
Okay, all right. So it had gone up. All right, that's fine. That was my question. Okay. Well, then reality, we need to be realistic about things. So if it is 100K, then that's what it is. Okay. All right. Well.
Okay.
My enthusiasm has been curbed.
Okay. So yeah, I think, yeah, it sounds like between maybe reducing M1 a little bit, depending on stop time from MAPC, or T1, right? Like an estimate on what could be completed that would kind of at least acknowledge that this one is consistently, of interest. What's the minimum amount that would be needed? Hopefully between those two things, we could get this a little bit closer. Go ahead, Annette.
I just want to be clear, are we talking about just TE2 or TE2 and T1? because we only show TE2 there. T1 has another $40,000 budget. So if we're combining them, it would be 60 instead of the 20.
Right. Yeah, I think we had said that if we had to pick one, it would be TE2, just because of this constraint here.
Mhm.
That we'd at least be, producing something that would get at this topic.
Okay, I just want to be clear though, because when we were talking about this, we were talking about the concept that was discussed was T1. So it's not clear to me that everyone understands TE2, what that study is versus what the combined T1 and TE2 are. So I think we should be clear on that.
Okay. Yep. Agreed. Okay. Yeah, I think as part of a final kind of listing, it would be helpful to have the blurbs written out again, just to make sure we're all on the same page of what's going into the discrete study list. Okay. Any other thoughts? I know we're a bit over time, but I think as far as the TE1 question goes, like I think that's something that maybe, we could be done offline just to see what staff thinks is reasonable as far as a dollar amount, and maybe that's something we could chat about separately. But, okay. All right. Any other closing thoughts before I think?
Well, I do want to say thanks for that clarification, Annette. I was confused, and it was T1 that I was more in favor of than T2. But so yeah, but nonetheless, that's where we are now. So just I guess the only thing I would say is that we do have T4 now at 70,000, but Sandy had made it clear, that it's more than that. So I guess we'll want to add back in, probably that 30K and get it back to 100,000, just so we're realistic about where we are.
I mean, to be clear, $70,000 is enough to get a good amount of work done on that. It just means that we'll be looking for additional funding to accomplish what we really, want to deliver in future years also.
I got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I suggest that if we agree, and I mean the members of the board agree on the list that's here, that staff can go back and work on trimming budgets as much as possible to try to fit within the budget that we have. We're close. And then decide, do we need to take studies out, or can we trim budgets on the existing ones to fit them within?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I think that would be preferable. And of course, these are estimates, right? So over the course of the year, things can change and other tasks might go down. We could reallocate depending on which ones are moving faster and which ones need more. So yeah, I think the preference would be to get it, the ones that we're interested in to move forward. And then I think kind of reallocate if needed from there among the existing other tasks. So yeah, I think that's the next step, is just to come up with new amounts based on what we talked about here, and then maybe circulate a new list and kind of give folks that to react to, and then we can hopefully finalize it. But this should hopefully give a sense of what's of interest, and if folks do have strong feelings about any that we eliminated, I think just, I think that should be, documented. So feel free to reach out, and I think at any point in response to that list, we can always take anything else into account. Yeah, go ahead, Laura.
So I just wanted to make sure I'm clear on where we are. So is T4 at this point off the list, or is that being held for, potential reallocation as other budgets are adjusted?
I think it would be just based on where we are with the budget. I think it seems like it might be off the list right now, but there are other sources besides the discrete funding. Like I think we have, MassDOT directed PL funds, and I think there's MBTA funds. I'm not sure how, maybe it's more appropriate for that one to fall under a different category.
Yeah, and maybe that's one that's worth us continuing a conversation about. I mean, I know we've talked about some changes to the scope from what was originally proposed, but I think there's a potential tie-in to, some other study ideas that we have batted around with OTP. So maybe there's another bucket of funding that would make sense. So we can talk more.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds good. Okay. All right. So does this give what you need for the next step, Srileka?
Yes, so just to clarify, I will do a bit of a one-page kind of recap of what we talked about today and what is going into this next sort of list that I'll be circulating with adjusted budgets, and that's what staff and I will work on over the next couple of days, just to see where MAPC funding can come in for some of these for M1 and TE4, and then just adjust numbers here and there, and I'll get that to the committee by the end of next week, with the hope that we can have a final sort of list following that conversation. I think for our purposes, I did just want to clarify, if there are any studies that I guess are not on this list that members feel very strongly about, please let me know, so we can continue that conversation, because otherwise I think we may move forward with this list and then just continue working on budgets for specific projects, if I'm understanding this correctly.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so if there are strong feelings about certain studies, to definitely reach out to staff and make sure that's voiced, and we can kind of take that from there. Go ahead, Len.
Well, I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
Oh, okay. No worries. Okay, so that's the next step. I know we're kind of past time here, so I think we have an item on members items, but I'll ask if there are any members items. Len,
Well, actually, I guess this is a question, because I thought you were going to go here on it without me. So when are we meeting next?
So I think because we have this listing, I don't think there will be another meeting right before the next MPO meeting, which is when the UPWP will be released. Do we decide July 21st, right?
Yes.
I'm not sure.
I thought maybe we were thinking about a meeting on the 14th. No.
We're aiming to have the document published on the 14th for the 21st meeting of the MPO.
Oh, okay, that's where I heard the 14th. Okay, fine, okay, fine. Yeah, all right, I'm clear now. Thank you.
Yeah, we can chat offline and others on what makes sense for our next meeting date, and we can let folks know. So that sounds good. All right, so I think with that, can ask for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Len Diggins, Budget Council.
For a second.
Second.
All right, thank you. Any thoughts, questions, discussion? All right, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 All right. All right, thanks everybody. Good work today. This is really, really good, and we'll be in touch about next meeting date and go from there. So
Thank you.
Good job, Derek. Take care. Bye.
All right, bye.